Section 33 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 6, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Elisabeth, Chapter 8, Part 5. Elisabeth sometimes punned and played on words. When the Archduke raised his siege from a place called the Grave, in the Low Countries, the Queen received early private intelligence of the fact, and, when her secretary came to transact business, she addressed him with these words: "Wot you what? The Archduke is risen from the grave?" He answered, "And please your Majesty, without the trumpet of the Archangel?" The Queen replied, "Yea, without sound of trumpet." But for the delusive matrimonial treaty between Elizabeth and the worthless heir presumptive of France, the Netherlands would have been at this crisis the theatre of a threefold contention between Spain, England, and France. The object of the States was to obtain the united protection of the two last named powers against their legitimate oppressor, Philip. They deemed they should secure this by conferring the sovereignty on the Duke of Anjou, whom they and half the world regarded as the husband-elect of the maiden monarch of England. And by this measure they trusted to secure the friendship of both Elizabeth and Henry III. Their calculation was, in the end, a sagacious one, but the suspicious temper of Elizabeth led her to take the alarm, in the first instance, at not having been consulted by Anjou ere he presumed to accept the preferment that was thus flatteringly offered to him. Under an evident excitement of feeling, she addressed the following eloquent letter to Sir Edward Stafford, her ambassador at Paris. Queen Elizabeth to Sir Edward Stafford. Supposed date, August 1581. Stafford, as I greatly regard your poor man's diligence, so I will not leave him unrewarded. For the charge I have written to Monsieur, that is her lover Anjou. What I have given in to you, this it is. First, for the commissioner's authorities, I have good reason to require that they may be as I desired, both for present mislikes, as well as for after mishaps. It happened in Queen Mary's day, that when a solemn ambassade of 5 or 6 at the least were sent from the Emperor and King of Spain, even after the articles were signed, sealed, and the matter divulged, the danger was so near the Queen's chamber door that it was high time for those messengers to depart without leave taking, and bequeathing themselves to the speed of the river stream, by water pass with all possible haste to Gravesend, and so away. I speak not this, that I fear the like. But when I make recollection of sundry kinds of discontentments, all tied in a bundle, I suppose the faggot will be the harder altogether to be broken. There is even now an accident fallen out, of no small consequence to this realm. I am sure the States have accorded to the demands of Monsieur Anjou, and do present him the sovereignty of all the Low Countries. Suppose now, how this may make our people think well of him, and of me to bring them to the possession of such neighbours? O Stafford, I think not myself well used, and so tell Monsieur, that I am made a stranger to myself, who he must be if this matter take place. In my name, show him how impertinent it is, for this season, probably meaning their matrimonial treaty, to bring to the ears of our people so untimely news. God forbid that the banes of our nuptial feast should be favoured with the sauce of our subjects' wealth! Oh, what may they think of me, that for any glory of mine own would procure the ruin of my land? Hitherto they have thought me no fool, let me not live the longer the worse. The end crowneth the work. I am sorry that common posts of London can afford me surer news than the inhabitants of towns will yield me. Let it please Monsieur to suspend his answer unto them till he send some unto me of quality and trust, for example, some of the leading men of the Low Countries, to communicate and concur with that I may think good for both our honours, for I assure him, it shall or will too much blot his fame if he deal otherwise, not only in my sight, to whom it hath pleased him to promise more than that, but especially to the world, that be overseers of his action. Let him never procure her harm, whose love he seeks to win. My mortal foe can no ways wish me a greater harm than England's hate. neither should death be less welcome unto me than such a mishap betide me. You see how nearly this matter ringeth me, use it accordingly. If it him, the deputies, for example, from the Low Countries, may have the charge of this matter joined with the other two that were afore mentioned. I dare not assure monsieur how this great matter, for example, their wedlock, will end, until I be assured what way he will take with the Low Countries. For rather will I never meddle with marriage than have such a bad covenant added to my part. Shall it be ever found true that Queen Elizabeth hath solemnized the perpetual harm of England under the glorious title of marriage with Francis, heir of France? No, no, it shall never be. Monsieur, may fortune ask you, why should not the Low Countries be governed by the indwellers of that country as they were wont, and yet under my superiority, as that of the King of Spain? I answer, the case is too far different, since the one is far off by sea's distance, and the other near upon the continent. We willingly will not repose our whole trust so far on the French nation, as we will give them in pawn all our fortune, and afterwards stand to their discretion. I hope I shall not live to see that hour. Farewell, with my assurance that you will serve with faith and diligence. In haste, your sovereign, Elisabeth. The gist of this letter seems to be, that Elizabeth was provoked at the unexpected occurrence of her lover, Francis, Duke of Anjou, being elected sovereign of the Low Countries. She says that she considers the step as untimely or premature, deeming that the intrigues of France had outwitted her therein. Her reasons may be deduced from the document, because as the heir of France was elected sovereign of the Low Countries before his union with her, these valuable provinces would in consequence go with his inheritance, in case she should have no offspring by him. And thus would the Flemish trade and alliance, which had been the main object of English policy for 5 centuries, be forever lost to England, and gained by France. While on the contrary, if Anjou, as her husband, had been elected sovereign of the Low Countries, she would have contrived to have had the best share of the power and dignity, and England might have contended successfully the right of keeping them as appendages to the crown. Thus viewed, the letter is one of the best specimens of Elizabeth's love and care of her country, and of a grand and far-sighted policy in anticipating the evils that might arise to England after death had removed her from the scene. Elizabeth's displeasure was, however, quickly mollified. She not only acquiesced in the election of Duke Francis of Anjou to the sovereignty of the Low Countries, but assisted him with the subsidy of 100,000 crowns, and added a hint of her favourable disposition towards their marriage. An embassy extraordinary was immediately sent from the court of France, of which the Prince Dauphin of Auvergne was the principal. They were received in the Thames with the greatest honours by Elizabeth's command, and landed at the Tower under a salvo of artillery. They were conducted by the young Philip, Earl of Arundel, the representative of the unfortunate Duke of Norfolk, Sir Philip Sidney, Fulk Greville, and Lord Windsor, who were esteemed 4 of the most honourable gentlemen of the court, to a new banqueting house, which had been erected for their reception at Westminster, where they were entertained in the most sumptuous manner. Among the pageants, sports, and princely recreations that had been prepared in honour of these distinguished foreigners, a tournament had been in contemplation. But such was the distaste manifested by the great body of her people against the French marriage, that the queen, apprehending serious tumults from any public collision with the noble foreigners, issued a proclamation that none of her subjects should either strike or draw weapon within 4 miles of London or the court. Although the matrimonial negotiations had been renewed, in compliance with Elizabeth's insinuated wish, she was no sooner pressed to conclude the treaty than she started fresh objections, and proposed, in lieu, one of perpetual alliance between the crowns of England and France. The King of France replied, that he was ready to sign such a league as soon as the Queen of England should have fulfilled her promise to his brother. At length it was mutually agreed that the Duke, his associates, and servants, being no English subjects, should have liberty to use their own religion in their own houses without molestation. The Duke of Anjou and the Queen of England, within 6 weeks after the ratification of the treaties specified, shall personally contract marriage in England. It was stipulated that, as soon as the marriage was completed, the Duke should assume the title of king, but the question of his being crowned should be referred to the consideration of Parliament. In the event of his succeeding to the crown of France, his eldest son, by Queen Elizabeth, was to inherit that realm, and the second that of England. When it is remembered that her Majesty was in her 49th year, the contingency of 2 sovereigns proceeding from her marriage with the youthful heir of France appears somewhat visionary. It was, however, further provided, that in the event of the Queen dying before the Duke, he was to have the tuition of all their children till the sons should attain the age of 18, and the daughters 15. He was to settle upon the Queen, in dowry, 40,000 crowns per annum, out of his lands at Berry, and the Queen was, by Act of Parliament, to secure to him, for his life, such a pension as she might please to appoint. In other matters, the treaty was framed according to the marriage articles between the late Queen Mary and Philip of Spain. Before the 6 weeks, stipulated for the fulfilment of this treaty, had expired, Elizabeth faltered in her resolution, and attempted to evade her engagement. Yet she professed to bear a most sovereign love to her betrothed, and that her demurs only proceeded from her doubts how her subjects stood affected towards her marriage with him. The Duke, who, whatever were his faults as a politician and a man, was an accomplished wooer, resolved to take no refusal from any one but the Queen herself. He had had the good fortune to achieve a successful military enterprise in compelling the Prince of Parma to raise the siege of Cambray, and, crossing the seas, hastened to plead his own cause to his august lady love. He arrived early in November, 1582. Elizabeth gave him not only an honourable but a most loving reception, and for a time appeared to abandon herself to the intoxication of an ardent passion. She declared that he was the most deserving and constant of all her lovers, and even made political engagements with him without consulting her ministers. On the anniversary of her coronation, which was, as usual, celebrated with great pomp, she, in the presence of the foreign ambassadors and her whole court, placed a ring on his finger, which was regarded by all present as a pledge of her intention to become his wife, and from that time the prince was looked upon as her betrothed husband. Her conduct at this time was either that of the most enamoured of women, or the most unblushing of coquettes. Her gift of the ring was duly reported by the French and Dutch envoys. Bonfires and salvos of artillery manifested the satisfaction of these countries at the prospect of so glorious an alliance. Her own people took the matter differently. Leicester, Hatton, and Walsingham were determined to prevent the marriage, and laid their plans accordingly. They were among the commissioners whom the Queen had commanded to prepare the articles, and also a paper prescribing the rites for the celebration of the nuptials. This paper was actually drawn up and subscribed, but the same evening, as soon as she returned to her chamber, all her ladies, who had received their lesson from the anti-matrimonial cabal, got up a concert of weeping and wailing. They surrounded their royal mistress, and, throwing themselves at her feet, implored her to pause ere she took so fatal a step as contracting marriage, at her time of life, with a youthful husband, by whom she would probably be despised and forsaken. They represented all her sister had suffered from her joyless union with Philip of Spain, and entreated her not to share her power and glory with a foreign spouse, or to sully her fair fame as a Protestant queen by vowing obedience to a Catholic husband. Elizabeth passed the night without sleep. In the morning she sent for the Duke. He found her pale and in tears. 2 more nights such as the last, she told him, would bring her to the grave. She described the conflict of feeling between love and duty in which it had been passed by her, and told him that although her affection for him was undiminished, she had, after an agonizing struggle, determined to sacrifice her own happiness to the welfare of her people. Anjou would have remonstrated, but Hatton, who was present, acted as a spokesman for the agitated queen, and, with statesmanlike coldness, stated the objections to the marriage in terms which proved that they were regarded by the council as insuperable. The duke retired in great disorder to his own apartment, and, plucking the ring from his finger, flung it passionately on the ground, exclaiming at the same time, that the women of England were as changeable and capricious as their own climate, or the waves that encircle their island. He then demanded leave to depart, but Elisabeth implored him to remain, for that it was her intention to marry him at a more auspicious moment, but at present she was compelled to do violence to her own feelings. The credulous prince believed, and tarried 3 months, waiting the auspicious moment, which was destined never to arrive. Elisabeth meantime lavished the most flattering attentions upon him, and, like Calypso, omitted no device that was likely to retain this ill-favoured Telemachus spellbound in her enchanted isle. She danced frequently, and had many tragedies and comedies acted, with masks, and all sorts of entertainments for his delight. On the New Year's Day he tilted before her, at a tournament given in honour of his visit. He had chosen the following verse for his device: Serviet caterem, dulcis torque Eliza. The moment the course was over, the queen hastened to him, and if we may believe the report of the Duc de Nevers, who was present in the royal lover's suite, she saluted him repeatedly, and perceiving that he was fatigued, took him by the hand, and led him to his own chamber, that he might repose himself. The next morning she paid him a visit before he rose. Many reports, even more derogatory to the dignity and delicacy of the queen, were in circulation, but these, we trust, were the profane inventions of her foes, since they were chiefly founded on the malign gossip of the Countess of Shrewsbury, or the persons who forged the coarse letter pretended to have been written by Mary, Queen of Scots, to Queen Elizabeth. But to return to facts. The States of Belgium grew impatient of the protracted absence of their sovereign, and demanded his return. The prince himself was weary of the absurd thraldom in which he was held, and finding it impossible to bring his wary inamorata to the desired point, determined to keep no longer as the puppet of her wayward will. He announced to her the day of his departure. She remonstrated. He explained the necessity of his return to his new subjects. She called them villains, and would only consent to his departure on condition of his promising to return in a month, and insisted, in spite of his avowed reluctance, on accompanying him part of his journey to the coast. He certainly had no wish for this tender attention, and did all he could to dissuade her majesty from leaving London, telling her that the journey would be painful to her, and that, as the weather was fair and the wind favourable, he was loath to lose the opportunity of performing his voyage with all speed. Elisabeth was, however, resolute, and on the 1st of February she and all her court accompanied the prince on his journey as far as Rochester, where they passed the night. The next day her majesty showed him her mighty ships of war lying at Chatham, and after they had been on board several of them, the prince and all the great lords of France, who were in attendance, expressed their admiration of all they saw, and declared that it was not without good reason that the Queen of England was reported to be the Lady of the Seas. The queen told the prince that all these ships and their furniture were ready to do him service when it should be requisite, for which he most humbly thanked her majesty, and after a great discharge of the ordnance, they returned again to Rochester. The 3rd day they went to Sittingbourne, where, dining in company, the queen was served, after the English manner, by the greatest ladies of her court, and the monsieur, as he is styled by our authority, after the French fashion, by the gentlemen of his train, which ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant party no doubt, dined afterwards together. Anjou's impatience to be gone exceeded the bounds of civility. His highness besought her majesty again to go no further, declaring unto her that the fair weather passed away. But notwithstanding his entreaties, the queen went on still to Canterbury. There, after the queen had feasted the French nobles, she parted from the prince mournfully and in tears. In the Ashmolean collection, the royal autograph verses on Mountzier's departure, signed Eliza Regina, are still preserved. This little poem, though a decided imitation, if not a plagiarism, from Petrarca, is certainly the most elegant of Elizabeth's poetical compositions. I grieve, yet dare not show my discontent. I love, and yet am forced to seem to hate. I doth, but dare not what I ever meant. I seem stark mute, yet inwardly do prate. I am, and am not, freeze, and yet I burn, since from myself my other self I turn. My care is like my shadow in the sun, follows me flying, flies when I pursue it, stands and lives by me, does what I have done. This too familiar care doth make me rue it. No means I find to rid him from my breast, till by the end of things it be suppressed. Some gentler passions steal into my mind, for I am soft, and made of melting snow. Or be more cruel, love, or be more kind, or let me float or sink, be high or low. Or let me live with some more sweet content, or die, and so forget what love e'er meant. After the quotation of this amatory effusion, it would perhaps be difficult to make out a case of perfect indifference in behalf of the royal spinster, or to impute all the marks of fondness she manifested for her last French suitor to political coquetry alone. If we may judge from outward signs and tokens, the struggle was really severe between duty and passion in the bosom of the queen. During Anjou's journey to Sandwich, she sent repeated messages of inquiry after his health, and even when he was on shipboard, Sussex brought him an urgent invitation to return to the queen, but he was obdurate. Her ministers would not permit her to sully her glory by becoming his wife. He would not permit himself to be played with any longer. Attended by the Earl of Leicester, Lord Hunsdon, Lord C. Howard, 100 gentlemen, and an escort of 300 men, he sailed on the 8th of February for Holland, promising to return to Elisabeth in March, but she never saw him again. If we may credit the report of the gossiping heir of Shrewsbury, Elisabeth was scarcely less afflicted by the loss of Anjou than Dido for that of Aeneas. She refused to return to Whitehall, because it was likely to bring too lively a remembrance to her mind of him with whom she so unwillingly parted. She might nevertheless have retained this precious charmer at the price of marriage, but her fame, her power, and her popularity were dearer to Elizabeth than idle dreams of love, and she was blessed with a high degree of fickleness, which in due time enabled her to find a fresh and more agreeable source of amusement than cherishing the image of a lost lover. It would not only be a painful task, but incompatible with the plan of this work, to enter into the details of the persecutions on the score of nonconformity, which stain the annals of this period of Elizabeth's life and reign. Suffice it to say, that the unsparing use of the rack, the gibbet, and the quartering knife failed either to silence the zeal of the Puritans, or to deter the seminary priests from performing their perilous missions as teachers of their proscribed doctrines. The natural result of these severities was, to provoke a spirit of enmity against the queen, a spirit that animated the professors of these opposing creeds to dare the sternest inflictions of the secular power unshrinkingly, for conscience sake, even as the Protestant martyrs had done in the reigns of Henry VIII and Mary. Section 33.